Good morning, I'm Tom at Ledgemere Farm here in southern Maine. Today we're going to talk about everything you ever wanted to know about putting sheep on pasture. And what I'm going to start with today is, well, besides the fact that it's gone from 90 degrees to 40 degrees pretty much overnight, we're going to start with the vaccine that we're going to give our sheep before we put them out again today. And so the first thing we have is the CDT vaccine. It's really inexpensive. It's very common, very easily accessible. And I highly recommend it. I know a lot of folks don't like to inject their livestock with medications. However, this right here is proven effective for Clostridium types C and D and T, the tetanus. Now, Clostridium type C, not really common here in the United States. However, Pfeffringen type D is enterotoxemia, and I know it's a lot of buzzwords, but basically what it amounts to is what they call overeating disease, and it's toxic in lambs, and it's generally caused by a change in ration. So like when the lamb will go from, let's say, mom's milk, start getting over to creep feed and or hay, that's when it gets, they call it a pulpy kidney disease also. And what it happens is just, they call it the classic overeating disease, and it's, once they get it, it's not curable. So the only real tool is prevention. You can inject the dam before she lambs out, which will start the lamb with some immunity through the mother's milk. But the best thing you want to do is at about 30 days, you want to give them their CD and T. And tetanus is, well, we all know what tetanus is, right? Well, tetanus in sheep starts out with if you dock your lamb. So you're cutting them, you're castrating them, any of those things, and then the classic ways we would get tetanus where you step on a nail or something. And so, very inexpensive vaccine, and you want to give this sub-Q, which means you want to pinch the skin and make a tent and then kind of go in sideways. You don't want to go, intramuscular with it. So I'm going to demonstrate this real quick, and then we're going to move along to some other things. Now, a couple housekeeping items to start. I get these boxes, they already have the needle and the syringe on it. And some folks will just use the same needle for all their animals, and I really frown on that. I'm not a huge fan of sharing needles. I think that speaks for itself without any further explanation. So I have a fresh needle and syringe for 5 sheep, okay? The newest lamb I've got, he's already had his initial dose. And the 2-3 actually larger sheep, they got their first and second doses within the first year of their life. So every year you give them a booster. And so the question a lot of people say is, what do you give them for a second dose, or what do you give them for a booster? Well, you give them exactly the same dose that you gave them initially, which is 2 cc of this. And so these little 3 cc syringes work perfectly. So I'll get these opened up and I'll show you how we get the vaccine out. All right, I'm sorry about all the background noise. I'm out here in the barn with all the livestock. Now, you want to keep this chilled, so less than like 45 degrees, and it has an expiration date on it, so you make sure you want to use that before it expires. Otherwise, it's just rendered inert. It won't really hurt them, but it's not gonna do anything. So we have these syringes here with the needle, and you can see that it'll just pop off. So you want to make sure that you get that seated properly. So just a couple twists there, and then you should be able to pop it, and then the needle comes out like this. You don't want to lose that cap, right? Because you're going to put that in your pocket. So we hold this syringe this way, and we hold the vaccine upside down. Now this has a rubber over it, so this is airtight generally. We're gonna poke in from the bottom here, okay? And then we're gonna draw out. Now 2 cc is what they recommend, but I always pull out about 2 1/4, 2 1/2. Because even though that's supposedly airtight and there's no air in there, we're gonna extract or excrete about whatever it takes to make it exactly 2 cc. Now I've cleared this needle, there's no air in there, and it's just a common practice when you're doing injections. We don't wanna do anything wrong. So I'm gonna do this with the other 4. One thing I want to stress is that you have to make sure that needle is on correctly, otherwise when you go to draw it out, you're gonna be sucking air through the side. And then you're not going to get a full vial here or a full syringe full, and that's one of the reasons we draw it extra and then clear it, because we've got some air in there. We really don't want that. All right, so I have all my syringes. They'll have the dosage done in it. And so where do you get these, right? You can get them a lot of times at Tractor Supply. I get most of mine from Valley Vet. and the reason being is I can get it online and delivered to the house. Sometimes you have a hard time getting this because of, you know, drug use or whatever. Your veterinarian. So in some states, you have to go to your veterinarian to get these. So, you know, wherever you have to get them, that's where you have to get them. So before I actually do this, I'm just going to demonstrate how to do a sub-Q injection. Now this is Henry, and he's a wool sheep, and so wool sheep are a little bit more tricky than the hair sheep are, and obviously it's because of their wool, right? Historically, a lot of times people would give injections in the rump, but they discourage that because it ruins the meat. And even though Henry's, you know, a wether and he's going to be a pasture pet, I'm just going to demonstrate proper technique on him, even though he's not going to be freezer bait. So these guys are here. You can grab them right in the front and you know, make a little tent there for the injection site. But Henry, because of his wool, poses a little bit different challenge, so we have to look elsewhere. So we want to be real careful about how we do it with him. You know, generally you want to do it right here somewhere, but you know, with the wool makes it pretty difficult. So if you have wool sheep and they're getting their annual vaccine, a lot of times it's a behoove of you to do it after they've been shorn. All right, so I've got myself an area here where I can get in. So we're gonna take off our cap, but don't lose it, because took off the cap, but don't lose it, because we're gonna need that again. So we're gonna find a spot, okay, and make a little tent. You're gonna come in sideways. You're gonna feel it go in, so don't push the plunger until you actually feel it go in. And then with one quick move it, put it in, and then draw it out, and then all set. Now we'll just take our cap back out, cover the syringe and the needle correctly, and then dispose of it properly. So we'll just give him a little treat so he knows we're still friends. Right, bud? So I'm gonna go put him out in the pasture, and then I'll come back and I'm gonna cycle through the rest. I'm not gonna actually do all the rest of them with you, so I'll be back after I've done all. So another thing I'm gonna show you, well, I have Violet right here, is how to take care of hooves. And hooves to some seems like it's this huge mystery, but it's really very simple and it's very easy, and I'm going to show you a couple steps on how to make that part of your routine. So we'll start out with, what do we need? In our hoof kit here. So I just got this little tote here that you would take to the shower or whatever. And so first thing I need is a good pair of hoof clippers or hoof snips or whatever you want to call them. Having them be extremely sharp is a necessity, so be careful you don't cut yourself with them, but it's super important. Now these are just hoof picks that you would use for a horse, but I use them to clean the hoof before I start cutting because it will save the blades. And then we've got this right here, which I don't use this knife too much, but I do use this plane occasionally when I'm done. So you can pretty much do everything you need to do with this and this, but this makes it a little bit more. So with Violet here, okay. So Violet, I think she's 3. She might be 4. So she's fully grown. She's a good sized sheep, and she probably weighs close to 200 pounds. So you're not going to manhandle this sheep, you know, by yourself. So I find that chain works the best with these double snap hooks. I've got lead ropes for horses, and those work okay, but it's just not as quick as using a piece of chain. You can go to the hardware store and just have them cut off like a 2 or 3 foot piece of chain, a couple of these double hooks, and then an eye bolt on a wall. Now you've got a positive place to hook your animal up to. Now she's had her CDT, and while she's here, I'm going to look at her hooves. And I've done her hooves already this year, but we're just going to, for this, since that she's here, and I'm going to show you about hooves, I'm going to show you. All right, this actually makes it even better. So we can see her hoof here, and when we look at this, you've got these points, and what you don't want is you don't want this part right here to cover up the frog, and the frog is right here. Now this is just like your fingernails as far as this goes right here, and just take your time and make little cuts. Some people get afraid because if you cut in too quick, you'll actually get into the quick, which will make it bleed, and it's prone to infection. So you want to be careful, make deliberate cuts, and make slow cuts. This hoof here, and you can see it's starting to overlap a little bit here, and there's a little bit of growth down here. So you're just going to make small cuts, and it doesn't have to be perfect. If you want to know what a perfect hoof looks like, look at a newborn lamb. Their hooves are perfect when they're born, and you want to try to emulate that as much as possible. You can take a little bit off the back if that's growing in hard, but like I said, hers were done about a month ago, and because I live in Maine, and our soil, what there is of soil is covered in a lot of rocks. They do wear down a lot of their hooves naturally, so that makes my life a little bit simpler. So you can see it right here in the toe. I've got a pocket. And so what happens is, particularly in the spring when it's wet, these hooves are particularly prone to hoof rot, and to prevent that, we want to make sure we get all the stuff out. Give her a good surface. You just want to take a little bit off the toe, not too much. You can see it's white there, and that's like cutting your own fingernail. So you don't want to get into the quick. If it gets red or pink, if you got to the pink, you've gone too far. So if you see any pink, stop. Don't cut any more off. Little tiny cuts are the key. Now, if you've got a sheep that's a little bit more rascally than Violet here, you might want to get some help. You can have somebody kind of push her against the wall or push him against the wall while you're getting this done, and that'll make your life simpler. Now, she only has a little bit of patience, and you know, that's to be expected from a sheep. So she's being good right now. Now we're just going to take this plane, and we're just going to shave that off. And be careful you don't shave off your finger, because that doesn't feel so great. And then you just kind of separate them a little bit like that, and you get a nice planed off area. And it's that simple. And you want to do all four. What you don't want to do is flip the sheep over on her back. Some people like to flip the sheep over, and you want to be careful, because you don't want them to get twisted gut, and that's where their intestines and stomach gets all wrapped around itself, and then it's generally fatal. So be careful that you don't be roughing your sheep up too much. Some people like to sit them down and do it, and that's okay generally for the front, and the back ones are a little bit more difficult. I found that just doing it like a horse, sometimes you can straddle them and do it, so you're facing the rump to do the back feed, and if you've got a good sheep like Violet, they'll kind of help stand still for you. So let's move along to the next step. One thing that happens a lot in the springtime is calves and lambs in particular, they are susceptible to Coccidia. And what Coccidia is it's a parasite that lives in the intestines of the calves and lambs, and you'll know that they've got it because, number one, they'll have diarrhea. It's really like a dark, tarry kind of stool, and it smells real bad. It doesn't smell like typical manure, and you'll know, and they'll start to lose weight, and you have to act pretty quickly to combat that. There's three different things that I usually use. One is Amprid, Corid, and I think the other one's Ampromed or Amprostat or something like that. I don't always use the same brand every time, and I'm in my mind I'm not building up immunity to that kind of medication. So you don't want to just arbitrarily treat for cocci, but in the springtime it's present on the grass, and what happens is when you start to graze, the sheep and calves will graze near where they have defecated before, and the parasites will migrate over, then they'll be ingested. So it's one of those things it's really common, and it's really easy to take care of if you catch it in time. If you don't have a huge window with it, a few days, or you'll lose the animal. With chickens, when they get cocci, and so keep in mind the Coccidia that the chickens have is not the same that the sheep have. It's the same name, but it's a little bit different. It's kind of like chicken lice isn't the same lice that you'll get. So Coccidia is species specific, and even the goat cocci isn't the same as sheep cocci. However, having said that, if you've got one, you'll probably have the other, and it's just because, generally speaking, when I find Coccidia in my livestock, it's always in the springtime. The grass is wet, the new grass is coming up,
and the animals are out there, and so it's like eating too much salad. So that their system's already kind of getting a shock, and then they're susceptible to cocci. Another way that sheep or lambs are susceptible to coccidia is when you start weaning them. It's kind of a shock. So when you have a lamb and let's say you castrate it, dog its tail, take it away from its mother, and put it out on pasture. There's 4 things right there. So each one of those in itself is a shock. So you kind of want to stagger all those things and not do it all at once. Now, what I've got in my hand is a drench, and it's kind of like a syringe. And what you do is you put this in the coccidistat, and then you draw out the dosage per species, and it's based upon the size of the animal. You can also do like a 21-day prevention, and a lot of times what I'll do in the springtime, and I'm not one for blanket medication. However, in the springtime where it's present and it's predominant, I do tend to treat the trough of water, like the first couple troughs of water that I put out, with a coccidistat for the 21-day prevention. So when you put lambs, calves out on pasture, initially you kind of want to supplement with a little bit of hay. It's kind of like eating bananas, when you've got the runs. So what the hay does is it kind of binds them up a little bit, and then also if you feed them a little bit of hay in the morning before you put them out on pasture, their bellies are not empty, so that they've got something in their stomachs. Now, having said that, the overeating disease, that's possible, and so I treat for that with the CD&T. Some folks like to strip graze. They'll use like Premier One, or they'll just use a hot wire fence. And I have found, in my experience, that sheep just don't respect a hot fence at all. And Greg Judy says you should call those sheep out that don't respect a hot wire. Well, if I culled out all my sheep that wouldn't respect a hot wire, I'd be out of the sheep business. I would have none sheep. Especially with the wool breeds, they just unless they get it on their beak, they're not going to even feel the hot wire, even at 8,000 volts. They're just not going to feel it. Now with the cows, one hot wire, no sweat. I can run a temporary fence across each one of these main pastures here and strip graze it. And what strip grazing does is it forces them to eat the meat and the pudding. But you don't want to leave them there more than a few days, otherwise they'll end up just killing it. They'll decimate it, and then it won't come back, particularly when you get a dry spell. So you want to be very careful about your grazing practices. The other thing about strip grazing is you have to cart water to the animals unless you have some sort of water source. Now, the animals that I have, I generally bring them back up near the barn at night, and it's mostly because we live near a giant wildlife preserve, and there's just a lot of predators out there. There's thousands of acres behind me where we have animals that just think sheep are the most tasty thing. So I bring the sheep up behind the barn, and the cows also. It also saves me the agony of having nightmares at night if my animals have busted out and they're down the road somewhere. So if I have them up near the barn where it's tight and they can't get out, I have the peace of mind for that also. You can see here I've got a dug pond. They have automatic waterers up at the barn, so water up there is never an issue. And the animals have only been out here for a few days. So you can see all this clover here. And then I've got a lot of timothy coming in. Now this field right here was completely overgrown with brush when I moved here 10 years ago. And I've brought it back, and it's been a really painstaking process to get all these fields back. There's one over there across the stone wall. I've got some back there. And then all these fields were heavily overgrown with field pines. Lime was an important investment, and so the first thing you want to do before you even spread the first pound of fertilizer or lime or buy any seeds is do soil tests. You can buy the soil test kits and do them yourself. What I did is I got the Soil Conservation Service out here, sent a whole bunch of soil samples up to the University of Maine. I sent samples of my manure up to the University of Maine. And then they just sent me back. It cost me $5, I think, for the whole thing. They sent me back an itemized recommendation for each field of how many pounds of this and how many pounds of that I needed to put in to have an ideal field. So as you can see here, this is really green. I'm super happy here. I mean, I can't even tell you what this looked like. And I'll put up a couple pictures of what this field looked like when I first moved here. It was a disaster. So the animals haven't been down in this field yet, and I don't want the grass to get too far ahead of them. So what I've got is a cow lane over there that goes back up to the barn along the side through that area over there, and that way they're not coming through here. And if they use that cow lane to come in here, I can also redirect them to this field here, and then I can just run one hot wire across here, which is something I typically will do in the summer to make a cow lane down to this other big field here, which is 14 acres. I've seen some people, and they've what they've done is they've bought all the minerals separately and put out these little troughs with each different mineral in it. And the theory behind that was that the animals will know inherently which mineral they need, and they'll go get those minerals. But that is not true. What happens is the animals will just go to whatever mineral tastes the best to them and then devour it. They're not necessarily knowing which one is the one they need. So I like an all-inclusive sheep mineral, and you can get that at your feed store, and it's a sheep mineral mix. One thing you gotta be careful about with sheep is copper. Now, people say no copper, but that's not true. Sheep actually do need some copper. They just don't want to have too much. So like even the amount of copper that cattle and goats get is too much for sheep, but they do need some. And what happens with copper in sheep is that it doesn't initially bother them. When it acts up is when they get stressed out, and then they get the copper toxemia. Commercial fertilizers, I do not use them on my fields. Fertilize primarily with manure. I put the leaves, the compost, all of the stuff, stove ashes, and mix it all into my compost, and then just keep churning it with the tractor. And then I've got a nice amount, and I have two piles. So I have the pile I'm working on for this year, and then I have last year's pile. So as soon as the pile's workable in the spring, which is generally in April, I turn it one more time and set it off to the side until the last part of April, the first part of May, and then I spread it all. Your best bet is to talk to your soil conservation service or your local extension office. They can tell you which grasses are the best for livestock in your area. And here in Maine, where I am, it's timothy, brome grass, orchard grass, clover, and you can put some alfalfa out here, but it doesn't last. I've found that it just gets crowded out and it's gone. Or they'll graze it right down to nothing, and then it doesn't come back. There's several different types of forages that if they get gnawed down to the ground, they just get overtaken by the more aggressive forages. Yesterday I was trying to figure out why I had the cows in here, and then next thing I knew there were two fields over there, and I just realized, I checked all the fences up there and I couldn't figure out where they got out, and then I just walked down here now and I can see that I left this gate open right here, so they just went around round robin here and went back up. So, but anyway, I digress. So sheep fence generally is a woven wire, and sometimes people will put a hot wire on one side or the other to deter predators. It doesn't really do much for the sheep itself, but where I run sheep and cows together, I will generally run a strand either of electric wire on top or barbed wire, because what happens is the cows will just lean on that woven wire and they'll sag it down, and then next thing you know, they're jumping over.
So while I'm not necessarily fortunate in having fields that aren't full of rocks, I am very fortunate that I have lots of water down here. So I have these vernal pools all over the place. And a vernal pool is just a body of water that is around for quite a while in the early spring, early summer, or all spring, early summer, and then they disappear. And I've also got natural springs. And here's another one down here. So last year I brought the fence down out around here so the animals can get down to this area and access the spring. So I am very blessed in many ways, and the land that I have, all its different geographic features really makes farming interesting here. It's not boring, that's for sure. Now another thing that I want to mention, not just isolated here to Maine, it's common, I think, along the north in particular. The grasses here tend to be selenium deficient, and sheep and cows do need selenium. So what I do is when the ewes are pregnant and maybe a few weeks before birthing, I give them a selenium and vitamin E dose, and then the babies, I give them the same thing. And some people call it a Bosey shot. There's two different ways you can do it. You can administer a shot, or you can use the paste. And I use both. It just depends upon the situation I'm in. There's a disease, they call it stiff lamb disease, and basically what happens is, I don't know why they call it stiff lamb disease, because the legs aren't stiff, they're really kind of flouncy. And what happens is the sheep can't stand up. And if it's not treated really immediately upon birth, the lambs won't make it. And so they call it stiff lamb disease. And it's basically just selenium deficiency, and they can't stand up, and then they just ultimately pass away. So selenium, vitamin E, and a paste, you get that at Tractor Supply, and just be careful about the dosage, because you can actually overdose them on it and kill them. So be very careful about the dosage. All right, so we've talked about CDT vaccines. We've talked about hoof care, pastures, selenium deficiencies, minerals. Now let's go do a little bit more talking about minerals with the sheep. Now you can put out a salt block. A salt block is just one of the minerals, but they do require salt. So a lot of times we'll just get those Himalayan blocks on a rope and hang it near where they can access it, and then put minerals in a trough where they can get that as well. But the minerals particularly, you want to make sure that that's not going to be an environment where they get wet, they clump up and just rendered inert. Come on, Dexter. Let's go. Come on. Let's go. Come on. So here's like the orchard grass here. See how it's got the wide blades, and then the Timothy is the smaller, the thinner stuff. You can see it all along. You can see it's already coming to a seed. So you can pasture your sheep and cattle together. You can pasture sheep and goats together. They generally get along okay, but you just have to remember that the different species have different requirements. So what's good for one isn't necessarily good for the other. When you pasture sheep and cows together, the sheep have top and bottom teeth. The cows don't. So the sheep will crop down closer than the cows will. And sometimes you'll find that what one likes the other doesn't, so it's a more thorough grazing experience. We had a substantial rain today, which is great because it's really activated the manure. I spread the rest of it the other day. It's also good for all the hay farmers in the area, because they've spent an exorbitant amount on fertilizer this year, and you really need the rain to activate the fertilizer, otherwise it doesn't do anything. The price of fertilizer's doubled this year. And sheep are kind of like cows. They know where their stalls are, and they always go back to the same one every day. It's really interesting to watch. So hopefully these guys go where I want them to go, which is in the barn on their side and not down the main aisle. Because we live in Maine, I do feed kelp, and so this is a Maine product here. And when you open it up and look inside, it's just this black granulated powder here, but it smells like the ocean. Now, I don't keep rams around all 12 months for the same reason I don't believe a cow-calf operation for a small farm is efficient. The reason being is a ram's only good for a very short amount of time during his rut when the ewes are in heat. And it depends upon what kind of sheep you have. If you have dorpers or katahdins, where you can do the 1.5 breeding program, where you basically have an extra breeding every 2 years. I don't believe in that either, because I feel like it's pushing the sheep too much and wearing them out, and I really don't agree with that practice. So I get a new ram every year, and whether so there's a whole science behind breeding sheep. I generally will either buy a breeding ram and wether all of my rams, or if I have rams that are new from a different ram father, then they can breed their mothers back. And I know that sounds funny, but you can breed the mothers back. You can't breed the grandmothers back, and breeding sisters back is never a good idea either. So the breeding practice I have is either I use my own rams to breed in the fall, and then I just delay sending them to freezer camp just long enough until they've done their business, and you end up with between December and February babies. Just depends upon the maturity of the ewes and the rams that's doing the breeding. So just like not having a cow-calf operation, you know, with a mother cow, she's tied up 9 months out of the year. You still have to feed her all winter. Same thing goes with rams. I only need them for a month, and so I get them as babies in the spring. I run them all summer. They do their business, and then off to freezer camp they go. And is there a difference in taste between a wether and a ram? Not at 10 months, there's not. And rams are generally viable 7 months. They'll be viable for breeding purposes. So I keep my freezer lambs about 10 months and then send them away. And I only keep the ewes over the winter, and Henry, because he's got kind of a sentimental value. But generally speaking, I only keep the ewes over the winter. Everybody else goes to freezer camp. So it's just one way to save money. And also, rams are dangerous. And the first year, a year-old ram is probably not going to be too dangerous. But you get a ram that's 2 years old and up. Now, you'll have people, I know there's going to be people out there that say that their ram's the best, the gentlest, nicest ram that they've ever met in their entire life. That's great. It only takes one time to kill you or somebody else. So you could have the sweetest, nicest ram in the entire universe, and then one day he just has a bad day. His girls are in heat. You're a threat. You're down. And if you ever want to see what a ram does to somebody, go Google it or do a YouTube search on what a ram does to somebody. So as a small-time farmer, homeowner, especially if you've got children, don't keep a ram around. It's really a bad idea. I highly advise against it. I've got to go get the rest of my animals taken care of for bed. I really hope this has been beneficial to all of you. Thank you for watching. Please take a moment, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so that you're made aware of all future videos as they come up. I really appreciate all of you who give me the time to watch the videos, comment, and the feedback is great. I really appreciate it. Keep it up. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you next time.